Welcome back. This is Salam Media Highlights with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. And if you haven't heard, well, the breaking news is for the first time in South Africa's democratic history, the national budget has been postponed due to deep divisions within the government of national unity. Originally scheduled for today, the much anticipated 2025 budget speech will now be delivered on the 10th of March, a delay that signals significant political and economic uncertainty. And at the heart of this impasse is the controversial proposed VAT hike from 15% to 17%, a move that has sparked intense opposition from within the coalition government and across the political spectrum. While some argue that the increase is necessary for fiscal stability, others warn it could worsen the cost of living crisis for millions of South Africans who are already bearing the brunt of unemployment, inflation, and a standard of living that's just too high to maintain. But what does this delay mean for the country's economy, investors, and ordinary citizens? And does it reflect a deeper crisis within the GNU? And to help us unpack these pressing questions, we're joined by Thokozile Madonko, researcher at the Public Economy Project at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University. Thokozile, thank you so much for joining us again. We had a conversation earlier this morning, and this is not how we thought this day would pan out to be. Your reaction on the budget speech being delayed?
Well, I have two reactions. One is I have to eat my hat because I was absolutely certain that there wouldn't be any major tax changes. And here we see the potential of a major tax reform by increasing the VAT by 2 percentage points to 17%. So that's the first kind of shock. The second shock is that the government of national unity was not brave enough, perhaps, to table their proposal and to have it debated in public for allowing for transparency and accountability. Because remember, what the minister tables is a proposal. It's a draft act, draft law. And essentially that can be amended, and Parliament has the role and responsibility of amending the budget if what is tabled is not to the Parliament's liking in terms of the will of the people as our representatives. So it's an interesting time for both the government of national unity itself and its internal wrangling and discussions and decision-making, but it's also an important moment for us as South Africans to understand what decisions get made behind closed doors and what decisions get made in the open. And some of the ministers, as I was hearing them being the members of parliament, that were being interviewed, were saying that, why not let us debate it, bring it to the table and let us discuss it. And so I think it's interesting that that wasn't a choice that was made between the parties of the government of national unity to be strong enough to allow for robust, open debate on such a big ticket item as increasing VAT.
Some analysts are concerned that this delay sends the wrong message to investors and international markets. What kind of impact do you think this will have on South Africa's economic credibility, if I can put it that way?
So it's quite difficult to say without having spoken to kind of insiders. But it's important to note that generally the markets, investors, people with money, like certainty. And so what has happened today is it's created uncertainty. And so that's for sure not something that the markets like. There might be stuff that was in the budget that the markets weren't going to like. We don't know, right? Because it wasn't tabled. So we can only, listen to people who are close to investors and other kinds of formats that are talking about the credibility of the GNU. The important thing, though, from a political, perspective, is that coalition governments very often find it hard to agree on the budget. So it's not unusual. In some countries, the budget doesn't get passed. It sits and there's huge fights. So in some ways, this might be a wise decision, as opposed to saying not having a budget being passed and the collapse of government itself, because we have a Westminster model, and the argument has been that the budget has never been turned away because it would mean no vote in the executive, which would then lead to a potential collapse of the government. So it is not unusual for there to be much discontent and disagreement and horse trading around the budget, particularly for new parties as they are now governing. They are learning the ropes of what it means to actually make fiscal decisions. So it's one thing to be an opposition party, to shout from the outside. It's another thing to be a governing party and having to make the decisions, the hard trade-offs about where the rands and cents go.
I want to focus now specifically on that VAT hike proposal from 15% to 17%. I think we know by now that it's going to be a significant point of contention. What would this increase mean for ordinary South Africans in real time, particularly those in low-income brackets?
So I've been trying to think of a good analogy, one that doesn't involve violence, but I only come to the point of saying, it's a case of somebody putting a banana peel on the ground in front of you and giving you a sweet at the same time, and then telling you to walk. So in some ways, a VAT increase sounds like a good thing. It sounds like, yes, we're going to have more income to be able to pay for health, education, social development, defense, infrastructure, whatever it might be. But we're going to do that by taking money out of your pockets as general South Africans, because we're going to not think about the high net worth individuals. We're not going to think about corporates. We're going to hit you, the average South African, regardless of how much money you earn, by increasing VAT. And so VAT is considered a regressive tax because it doesn't distinguish between rich and poor. And also it's regressive in the sense that poor households spend a larger proportion of their income on foodstuffs, whereas wealthier households spend a smaller proportion of their income on food. So the actual impact of the VAT on a poorer household is exponential. The other thing that happens is that we're not guaranteed, and it depends on really goodwill of companies to not increase their prices by stealth, because it's very difficult to know what the cost of a product is. And so you know that you buy your milk. Are you going to do the calculation from this week to next week if it goes up by 3%? So it's absolutely, there's an opportunity here, and there's been research done globally that often when there has been a VAT increase, we get what's called greed inflation. And so companies take advantage of this and up the prices even more. And so it cancels out and creates a cost of living crisis, which is what the president said is one of his apex priorities, is to tackle the cost of living crisis. But you can't do that through VAT. VAT is not the mechanism for tackling a cost of living crisis. In fact, it's going to fuel a cost of living crisis for the majority of South Africans. There were other options on the table, and it would be interesting to see if the Democratic Alliance or the other GNU members come to the table and say, these are our alternatives. What we lack in South Africa is an alternative budget proposal, is a tabling of a budget that says, okay, this is what the government says the budget could look like. Here's what we think the budget could look like. And this is done in many countries around the world where there are alternative budgets that are tabled to show what other options are there available. And so Treasury should essentially make it known to the public why they decided VAT. Outside of corporate income tax, outside of playing around with the wealth tax, outside of other options around the South African balance sheet, the overall balance sheet, that they decided to target VAT, and why they think VAT is the best option for growth. I mean, it's a bizarre move.
Speaking of alternatives, the government had suggested that expanding the zero-rated tax basket could or would cushion the poor from the VAT hike. Do you believe this would have been enough to offset the impact on vulnerable households?
So there's been research done on VAT-exempt goods, and what it shows is that there's been higher inflation. The cost of those goods has increased over time. So that exemption doesn't prevent inflation. It doesn't prevent cost increases. And so extending the basket is important and absolutely essential if it can keep prices down. But given that some of the causes of inflation, and as I've mentioned, there's greedflation, which is one thing, just profit gouging. The other thing is if there's an external shock in terms of the products that are coming in or what we bring, or if there's an environmental shock or drought that can affect the price of goods that ordinary South Africans want to purchase. And also the other thing is we want to think about abroad. We don't want to just think about people's lives by the minimum. We want to think about them in their expansive ways. And so there are goods that families should be accessing, like fruit and cell phones and entertainment, things that are important to living a good life that are not VAT exempt. So, purchasing a laptop if you're a university student. So all of these things make a difference in the life. So when it comes to what does a good life look like and what things do you buy to make that a good life, then your VAT exemption becomes a huge, net. And so in some ways, it seems to be beside the point. Rather, include VAT on luxury goods like yachts and, other fancy cars and, things that the average South African is not purchasing.
I want to move on a bit before I let you go to, the politics, the governance, and, some of the policy, differences, ideological differences that, the GNU parties within the GNU have had. Number one, my question on that front is, this is obviously the first budget under this new coalition government. How does the shifting political dynamic complicate the economic decision-making process like we're seeing right now?
To be honest, I'm quite surprised because a very good friend of mine who sadly passed away, Eusebius McKaiser, always used to say that there was very little difference in terms of economic policy between the DA and the ANC. And so it is interesting that the DA has decided that they want to ask for more funding for education, which is absolutely necessary and should happen, but seem to be skeptical about VAT as the mechanism, but are not articulating an alternative. So they're not telling us where they think the money should be coming from. So maybe this will play out in the next coming days. But at the moment, we're just hearing that the DA was against the VAT increase. So what were they for in terms of being able to pay for increases in education, for example, which is what has been articulated the most, but in health, social development, housing, whatever it might be. So it's almost like the DA wants to have its cake and eat it. It wants to be able to deliver services, but not make the hard choices from a fiscal perspective that the ANC has been making in relation to their particular political idea about where growth is going to happen. But we see that the DA is now governing, and now they have to see the trade-offs have to be made, and it seems that they might not be willing to make those trade-offs.
And speaking of trade-offs, with the new budget date set for the 10th of March, what realistic compromises do you think the GNU can make to ensure that the budget passes without any further delays?
So I'm a fan of participation. So I really think, they could have tabled the budget today and allowed for public discussion, because remember, when the budget is tabled, there has to be public hearings. It's like any other piece of legislation. People forget this. And so there should be debate, there should be discussion, and it should be returned if people think there needs to be amendments, to say to Treasury, no, we disagree with this, amend it, or at least Treasury, provide us with your modeling to explain why you think VAT is the best option. And we saw that with the first round of VAT increases, that Treasury was very reticent to share their reasoning for why VAT was chosen at that time. So, and corporate income tax was cut, so the two things happened at the same time. So it's important for us to really look to the next sitting as one in which, regardless of what the GNU finalizes, that we see that once that budget is tabled, it becomes a public document and one that we can have public democratic engagement and transparency over. So my argument is that what should have really happened is that Finance Minister Godongwana should have opened up the process and discussion around this VAT increase in October already, and had a public discussion and debate about whether this is the way that the country should go. There's nothing stopping Treasury from holding roundtables, discussions, and in many countries, this is what happens. People, they debate the proposal before it even reaches Parliament. It happens with other pieces of legislation. So why close down the budget? Why not open it up? We've seen that this is a weak area of the Treasury, and this is from the International Budget Partnership's Open Budget Survey, where we do very well in terms of transparency and accountability, but we do badly on participation and engagement in fiscal policy and our budget processes.
And I think the concern from all South Africans right now is with the current delay, and if there are going to be further delays again, what are the potential risks for government operations, services delivery, and also general economic stability? How will this delay affect the ordinary South African? And if it does happen again, could the implications be even worse?
No, I don't think so. The budget is only passed in June, so we have a lot of time. In fact, the reason why I say it's a tight turnaround time is because often with legislation, it can take 2, 3, 4 years, whereas our timeframes are quite tight for budget legislation or money bills. So I doubt that there's going to be, I could be wrong. Today has shown that I could be wrong. There was a tax increase proposed and I didn't know it. So I'll have to eat my hat again. But I doubt that we will see a situation where the budget is not passed.
I think we're going to leave it there, Thokozile. Thank you so much for chatting to us. It's been a very, very eventful day, and looking forward to chat to you again in the not so distant future.
Thank you so much.
There you go. That was Thokozile Madonko, researcher at okay, I just lost my bearings there for a moment. All right, that was Thokozile Madonko, and she's a researcher at the Public Economy Project at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University. And yeah, you can tell us what you think. What are your thoughts? For the first time in South Africa, in post-democratic South Africa, the budget has been cancelled and it has been moved to a further date. Thokozile seems to suggest that there won't be any kind of immediate consequences for you and I, South Africans. Service delivery is still going to happen. Government's core responsibilities towards us, the citizens of this country, will not be disturbed in any way. We know that there's going to be another sitting on the 10th of March where we hope that the budget speech will be given there. But yeah, I think for now, the headline, the big story today is the fact that for the first time in post-democratic South Africa, the budget speech has been cancelled, and this is mainly because of that proposed 2% VAT increase, value added tax hike. So value added tax on the everyday products that you buy. There was a proposed 2% increase from 15% to 17%, a move which has sparked, I think, a significant and intense opposition from parties within the coalition government and across the political spectrum. You can engage with us on our various social media pages. You can go to our WhatsApp. You can give us a message there. Go out to our X account. You can search at Salam Media, and you can hashtag Salam Media Highlights, and you can give us your thoughts on what has become a historic day in South Africa. For the first time since the existence of a post-democratic South Africa, there has never been a cancellation of the budget speech, and this is happening under the government of national unity, another unprecedented and a watershed moment in South Africa's history, which is a coalition government compromising of a lot of political parties, and where the ANC is no longer the majority. Is this the current state of affairs that South Africans need to start getting used to? The fact that things are not going to be as they've always been since we've been a democracy. There's going to be changes. We've had a budget cuts because this is a new government, this is a new dispensation, and I think everyone is just trying to figure it out. And one of the first moments that the chapter of the Government of National Unity is exactly what has happened just a few hours ago, the cancellation of the budget speech by Minister Enoch Godongwana. Keep it locked to Salam Media. We'll be giving you the latest on that front, and you can go out to our website, www.salammedia.com. I'm sure our brilliant online team is curating a detailed analysis of what you need to know regarding this, and they'll probably have the article before the end of the day, so check that out. But from myself, Salilo, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye for now.